Chapter 7. The next instant, Chengli found himself standing alone in a swirl of anger as fourth brother swaggered away to collect the two donkeys. Here he'd caught fourth brother with stolen goods, stolen from the very man who had helped him and given him a job. Yet Chengli thought, I don't dare say a word. He tried to breathe slowly. He talked to his spirit father. He thought of old Cook. Useless, all useless. He remained furious at fourth brother, but realized there was nothing he could do. Scowling, he watched the older boy present the donkeys to Dakshish and Sudarshana with a flourish. Here, my royal friends, are your mighty steeds. With a grin, he reached out and helped first Dakshish and then Sudarshana mount their donkeys. Chengli nodded to the group. I'll be with you in a minute, he called and turned away. He walked in a long, slow circle, shoving at stones with his foot and shoving at thoughts with his mind. I must calm my anger before I go back to the princess, he thought. He knew it was fourth brother's fast talking that had allowed them to have this special day, but with the same ease, fourth brother's words had also disposed of stolen property. Anger now stood between them. Fourth brother rattled off any words at all to get whatever he wanted from people. Chengli knew that, had known it all along, but today those words had yanked him up to the best experience and down to the very worst. He kicked another stone and pounded the air with his fists violently at first, and then softer and softer, forcing his temper under control. Let's go, Dakshish called. I'm coming, Chengli answered. Everyone seemed to feel the change of mood as they started off with heavy labored plodding. The horses, the donkeys, even El Khalid put their feet down in slow, dragging rhythm. Even the imperial guards ambled slowly along beside them. Tired, thought Chengli. We are all so tired. He surely was exhausted by the day of fantasy and friendship, and then the crash back into the depths of reality. His goal now was to return the princess to the care of Amma and get himself back to the familiar routine of his chores. He walked in the lead, looking at nothing, and saw out in front of him, with the fuzziness of a fading memory, the five of them back on the dunes, climbing, laughing, and talking like ordinary friends. The only real friend he'd ever had was Little Limp, and Chengli hadn't even thought of him in weeks. Little Limp drew his thoughts to old Cook, and his stomach began to ache. Could it be, he wondered, that Mei Ling loved her Amma the way he loved old Cook? Like the mothers they didn't remember? His eyes felt uncomfortably hot. Too much sun and sand, that was all. Thoughts of Amma and old Cook reminded him of the jade he carried in his pouch, and the jade made him think again of his father. It was too soon to expect anyone to remember him. The far west was where they had lived. But people moved from place to place, and someone, somewhere, might recall Inspector Chao Chengwan. The swaying of the camel plodding behind him rocked his thoughts in an endless rhythm. Mei Ling, friend. Fourth brother, enemy. Father, forgotten. Father, remembered. Possible, impossible. The ideas swayed, bumped, and slid to the beat of the camel's soft, plodding feet. Halfway to the caravan field, the wind came. Oh no, Chengli hollered to the wind. Why have you come back to torment me? I'm doing what you want. But this wind picked up the sand and twirled it around the camel's legs, and the camel felt it. El Khalid pulled back against the lead rope, groaning and complaining. Not a spirit wind this time, for everyone felt it. What's wrong with you? Chengli snapped at El Khalid. He looked up at Mei Ling on her padded saddle. Both her hands gripped the long hair of the camel's shaggy hump as she kept her balance against the beast's endless swaying. Something's bothering him. He didn't act like this earlier, Mei Ling called down. It's the wind. Look, Chei Ling said, pointing to a narrow wall of sand that snaked across the path in front of them, sweeping slowly closer, inches off the ground. The sand danced higher and higher until it swirled in front of his eyes. Through the dancing sand, distant ghost flecks moved, trailed, and disappeared. Puzzled, Chengli blinked and pulled back from the wind. Suddenly the sky darkened, and shouts sounded across the desert. "Sandstorm! Take cover!" "Storm?" screamed the princess. "Take cover? Under what?" She ducked her head down against Khalid's strong neck. "There's nothing on this entire desert taller than my knee, and sand will bury us." Everyone dropped to the ground and pushed their animals down too. The donkeys, the horses, and camel all instinctively tucked their face under their bodies or into the ground, covering their eyes, mouth, and nostrils. A wall of solid yellow swept toward them. "Grab the saddle blankets!" shouted one of the soldiers. "Get down by the animals! Turn your back to the wind! Do it now!" The howling of the wind swallowed his voice. The wall of sand burst in an explosion of gravel lifted from the desert floor. Chengling shoved the princess down just as the hissing sheet of yellow wind tore at them, swirling, whining, full of grit. The wind ripped at his hands and clawed his jacket. He blinked his eyes, and the ground rose and fell, appearing and disappearing in front of him. "Get in here!" a hoarse voice, barely recognizable as the princess's, called out from under the blanket. Chengli saw her lift a corner, and he dove under, pulled the blanket tight, and slammed his eyes shut. He coughed, sand gritted between his teeth. They waited, rocked by wind. The fine sand slid under the blanket, under his clothes, and sifted into his eyes in spite of the rag over his face. They waited. Chengli tried not to breathe. They waited. The howling lowered its pitch. They waited. The screaming wind sank into silence, a shiver, a scratch. The sounds of life slowly emerged out of the packed and rearranged sand. Chengli pulled the princess out from the mound of sand that had piled over them. He laughed. Mei Ling cried. Sand matted both their bodies and plastered itself on both their faces. Chengli coughed to clear his throat. The princess shook her head, and sand cascaded down onto her shoulders. She looked at him and laughed through her tears. "We're all right," she said. We're really all right. I've survived my first sandstorm. Let's go help the others." She led the way to where the others were digging out, and together they straggled homeward toward the caravan, one behind the other. Tired as he was, Chengli found an enormous new thought in his head. People can change. The princess, bossy, selfish, proud, for just a short time had been a friend, and now, after the storm, she'd actually helped. He wondered if changes could last, but he didn't have time to ponder the idea, for out of somewhere came a new sound, soft and distant, interrupting his thoughts. Louder sounds, gruff and strident, demanded his attention. Ahead of them, where a black silhouette should have shown the long line of their caravan, Chengli stared. The royal soldiers pulled to a stop. Khalid hummed in distress. Instead of an orderly caravan, animals milled about unattended, headed out into the endless desert. Men ran back and forth screaming. Master Feng's flag lay toppled on the ground. Arrows flew, fires burned. "The caravan's being attacked!" the soldiers yelled at Chengli. "Robbers! They used the storm to hide their moves!" The 4 soldiers grabbed for their bows and arrows and shouted orders. "Stay here!" yelled one. "The fight is not over!" "Get your animals down, all of them!" yelled another. "Get the princess out of sight! Get her camel down!" The men galloped off toward the chaos. Scrunched down behind their animals, Chengli and the others peeked out to watch the action. He could hear the shrieks of men and animals, the zing and thud of countless arrows, but he couldn't tell which way the arrows were flying, nor who was being hit. "You can look," Chengli called to Dakshish. They're too busy to notice us. Even from the distance, they could see that the attack had been aimed at the carts of the princess. The bandits circled on their ponies, their arrows keeping away from the defenders. Others crawled over the royal carts, pulling out whatever attracted them. The dowry cart lay on its side, and the thieves stuffed loot into bundles, loading up their ponies. A woman, it must be Amma, could be seen riding away behind a man on horseback, her distraught voice piercing the air. "Put me down! I must serve my princess! Let me down!" No one paid attention to Amma's wails. The horse, with 2 riders, disappeared in the distant haze. Shivering with cold and fear, Chengli waited in the growing dusk and watched until all the attackers withdrew toward the distant mountain. Dakshish stood up and silently led the group across the gravel to their camp. Dakshish and his sister looked over the damage to the carts at Chengli and fourth brother stood in silent disbelief. The dowry cart lay toppled and empty. The cooking cart was full of smashed and scattered cookware, and Cook himself sat crying in a corner, white as a ghost but uninjured. The princess's own red and gold cart lay wrecked beyond repair. A sign, thought Chengli, of the attacker's frustration at finding no princess. In revenge, the princess's driver and Amma had both been captured. Just like my father, thought Chengli. They're gone. People disappear in the desert, old Cook said. No, he yelled. No, no, no! Looking around, he noticed a makeshift circle set up to care for the wounded. We've got to find Master Fong and see how we can help, Chengli said as he headed for the circle. There he found the soldiers from the princess's dowry cart, wounded but still alive. Countless injured men lay collapsed in the circle, eyes wide with fear, moving from one man to the next. Master Fong, with his helper, Uncle Tao, at his side, carried bowls of precious water, torn cloth, and words of comfort. Uncle Tao knew all about medicines and ointments made from the plants he had collected, and now his knowledge was desperately needed. As best they could, the 2 men washed the wounds and softened small pellets of evil-smelling medicine with which they smothered each wound. Chengli bent over to help when the voice of the princess pierced the air. It's all your fault! Mei Ling picked her way among the wounded, coming up beside Chengli. The emperor will be furious. My new husband will not want me now. If you hadn't gotten us permission to go to the celebration, we would have been here, and all my soldiers could have fought in the battle. And Amma, my Amma! Her voice tightened and rose as she realized that everything she cared about was gone. How could you leave us with no protection? Chengli and fourth brother stood silent, unable to talk back or defend themselves. They looked at each other and then down at the ground. For once, even fourth brother had no words. He dared not argue with the princess. Behind them, Chengli could hear the voice of Master Fong as he moved through the debris, checking the wounded, giving an order here and an encouraging word there. He must have heard Mei Ling's hysterical voice, for he soon came forward to join them. Sand still clung to his bushy eyebrows, and blood had dried where it had spattered across his blue jacket. You are looking at a disaster, young lady, he said, his voice sharp with exhaustion. For the second time on this trip, it is my men who have saved your life. Had you been here, you, too, would now be a prisoner of some unknown tribe. The princess turned her back on the master and stomped her foot. Angry now, Master Fong kept talking. Life is hard sometimes, very hard, and all you can do is pick up and go on. Because my men took you to the celebration, you have survived. He pointed to the remaining cooking cart. Go to that cart with your 2 young servants, and think about what I say. My men have saved your life. The look on Master's face forced Mei Ling to obey. Chengli, still staring at the ground, grinned. Master had called them his men. He didn't have long to enjoy the compliment, though. Master Feng turned to fourth brother and called Chengli to join them. The princess was given over into our care. She is in grave trouble now. With Ma gone, her driver vanished, and her soldiers wounded. You two, he nodded at fourth brother and Chengli, you two now have less work, as some of your animals have been stolen, and others have died tonight. You have always worked well together. So now add to your duties the safety of the princess and her two young servants. We must show the prince. Oops. Sorry. We must show our emperor that we did our best to deliver her as instructed, in spite of the dangers that surrounded us. Master's words made Chengli wince, but he nodded to show that he had heard. His thoughts, however, did not agree. How could he possibly work with fourth brother now that he knew about the older boy's thieving? He didn't even want to be near him, but Chengli could not explain that to Master. Instead, he stood there and shivered. The storm, the attack, and now the order to work with that thief. It was just too much. His stomach lurched, and a chill raced down his back. He shoved his hand over his mouth and bolted away to a clump of desert thorn. His stomach lurched again as he heaved and heaved. When there was nothing left to throw up, he kicked sand over the disgusting mess and crumpled to the ground, tears mingling with the sand still on his face. His energy disappeared. He curled into the sand and lay still.